The blood on Katherine Palmer's apron had long since dried to rust brown when she finally lifted her head from the birthing bed and met the eyes of the woman who had just lost everything. 3 days of labor, a stillborn child, and hemorrhaging that nearly claimed the mother, too. It was the kind of night that made Katherine question why she had ever picked up this burden in the first place. But she knew the answer. Someone had to catch the babies in St. George, Utah, and after her own mother passed 2 years ago in 1871, that someone became Katherine, whether she felt ready or not at 23 years old. The desert sun was already climbing hot and merciless through the window when she stumbled out of the Hendricks adobe home, exhaustion weighing her bones down like stones. The red rocks surrounding their small Mormon settlement glowed crimson in the early light, beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. Katherine's medical bag felt impossibly heavy as she made her way down the dusty main street, past the general store and the meeting house, toward her own small cabin on the edge of town. She did not see the mountain man watching her from outside the livery stable, but Isaac Kane saw her. He had ridden down from the pine-covered mountains north of town 3 days prior with a string of beaver pelts to trade and a vague notion of restocking his supplies before heading back to his trap lines. But something about the exhausted woman with golden brown hair escaping her braid and shadows under her green eyes made him forget about leaving. He had asked around town subtle questions that did not draw too much attention and learned she was the midwife, unmarried, and by all accounts had a spine of pure iron. Isaac was not a man who lingered in towns. At 28, he had spent the better part of a decade in the mountains after the war ended, preferring the company of elk and eagles to people who asked too many questions. His broad shoulders and thick arms came from hauling traps and chopping wood, from wrestling supplies up rocky slopes and defending his camp from the occasional bear. His dark brown hair hung past his collar, and his beard covered a jaw that rarely smiled. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, too rough, too scarred, too weathered by sun and wind, but there was something solid about him, something that made people step aside when he walked past. He watched Katherine stumble slightly on the wooden steps of her cabin, catching herself on the railing. Something in his chest tightened. Before he could think better of it, his legs were carrying him across the street. "Madam," he said, his voice rusty from disuse, "you need help?" Katherine turned, startled, her hand flying to her chest. Up close, he could see the fine tremor in her fingers, the way her whole body swayed with fatigue. "I'm fine, thank you," she said automatically, the words of a woman who had learned not to accept help because it rarely came. "You do not look fine." The bluntness was not unkind, just factual. "When did you last eat?" She blinked at him, trying to place his face. She knew most people in St. George, but this man was a stranger, tall and broad and looking at her with dark eyes that seemed to actually see her, not just the midwife, not just the role she played. Yesterday morning, I think." Isaac shook his head. "You sit. I will bring food." Not asking. He was already walking toward the boarding house where he had taken a room, leaving her standing there with her mouth open. Katherine should have gone inside and locked the door. She should have ignored the strange mountain man with his commanding presence and his assumption that she needed taking care of. Instead, she found herself sitting on her front step, too tired to do anything but wait. He returned with a plate of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread wrapped in a clean cloth, along with a canteen of cold water from the well. "Eat," he said, placing them in her hands. "All of it." "I don't even know your name," Katherine protested, but she was already tearing into the bread, her stomach cramping with sudden desperate hunger. "Isaac Kane." He settled himself on the step below hers, his broad back creating a wall between her and the rest of the street. A protective stance, though he probably did not even realize it. "Mountain man. Trapper." "Katherine Palmer," she said between bites. "Midwife, obviously." "Bad night?" The simple question, asked with no judgment or platitudes, nearly undid her. Katherine felt her throat tighten. The worst kind. The baby didn't make it, and the mother nearly followed. Isaac was quiet for a moment, watching the street. "But she lived." "Yes. Because of you. The baby still died." "But she lived," he repeated, turning to look at her. "Because of you." Something about the certainty in his voice made Katherine's eyes burn. She focused on eating, not trusting herself to speak. They sat in silence while she finished the food, and when she handed back the empty plate, Isaac took it without comment. "You should sleep," he said, standing. His shadow fell over her, blocking the climbing sun. "I will come back later. Make sure you are all right." "You don't have to do that." "I know." He looked down at her, something unreadable in his expression. "But I will anyway." He walked away before she could argue, leaving Katherine sitting on her front step feeling oddly unbalanced. She could not remember the last time someone had taken care of her, even in such a small way. The warmth of the food in her belly and the memory of his solid protective presence followed her inside as she finally bolted the door and collapsed onto her narrow bed. When Katherine woke, the sun was setting and someone was knocking on her door. She stumbled up, disoriented, and found Isaac standing on her step with another plate of food and a serious expression. "You said later," Katherine said, rubbing her eyes. "I thought you meant tomorrow." "It is later." He handed her the plate roasted chicken and vegetables this time. "You need to eat again." "Are you going to make a habit of feeding me?" "If you keep forgetting to feed yourself." There was no humor in his tone, but Katherine thought she saw the tiniest twitch at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but close. She invited him inside this time, too aware of the gossip that would spread if they kept meeting on her front step. Her cabin was small but tidy, a main room with a kitchen area, a bedroom barely large enough for a bed, and shelves lined with jars of herbs and medical supplies. Isaac's large frame seemed to fill the entire space as he settled into one of her 2 wooden chairs. They ate together in comfortable silence. Katherine kept stealing glances at him, trying to figure out what he wanted, what his angle was. Men did not usually help women without expecting something in return, but Isaac just ate his food and looked around her cabin with calm interest, his gaze lingering on her medical books and herb jars. "How long have you been a midwife?" he asked finally. 2 years officially, but I helped my mother for years before that." Katherine set down her fork. "She was the midwife here before me. When she died of pneumonia, someone had to take over." "And that someone was you." "There was no one else." She shrugged like it did not matter, but they both knew it did. "I was 19. I had helped with dozens of births, but being responsible for them, that was different." "You ever lose anyone before?" The question was gentle but direct. Katherine appreciated that he did not dance around it. 3 babies, 2 mothers. Each one feels like a failure, even though I know sometimes there is nothing anyone can do." Isaac nodded slowly. "I knew men in the war who carried every death on their shoulders, the ones who survived, the ones who died, even the enemy. They broke under that weight." His dark eyes met hers. "You cannot carry what you cannot control. How do you stop? You do not stop feeling it. But you remember what you did save. You remember you showed up when no one else would. That counts for something." Katherine felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she had been carrying since the night before. "What did you do in the war?" "Things I try not to remember." His voice went flat, closed off. "That's over now." She recognized the wall going up and did not push. Instead, she changed the subject. "How long are you staying in town?" "Was planning to leave tomorrow. Head back to my trap lines before the good pelts are gone." He paused. "But I might stay a few more days." "Why?" Isaac looked at her like the answer should be obvious. "Because you are here." The simple honesty of it stole Katherine's breath. She was used to careful courtship rituals, to men who danced around their intentions with flowery words. Isaac's directness was like cold water after years in the desert, shocking and vital. "You don't even know me," she said. "I know enough. I know you spend all night saving lives and forget to take care of yourself. I know you carry weight that is not yours to carry. I know when you stumbled on those steps this morning, I wanted to catch you." He leaned forward, his large hands flat on his knees. "I know I was supposed to leave tomorrow, and now I cannot imagine going." Katherine's heart hammered against her ribs. "Isaac, I'm not good with words," he continued, "and I'm not easy to be around sometimes. I've been alone in the mountains too long. But I want to know you, Katherine Palmer, if you will let me." She should say no. She should protect herself from this intense, solitary man who looked at her like she was something precious. She should remember that she had built a life here, a purpose, and did not need complications. Yes, Katherine heard herself say instead. I would like that. Over the next week, Isaac Kane became a fixture in Katherine's life. He did not hover or crowd her, but he was there bringing her meals, chopping wood for her stove, fixing the loose board on her front step. When she was called out to attend a birth in the middle of the night, she would find him waiting outside when she emerged at dawn, ready to walk her home through the empty streets. The women of St. George watched this development with interest and some concern. Isaac was an outsider, a mountain man with no ties to their community and no apparent intention of joining the church that held the settlement together. But he was respectful and hard-working, and even the most suspicious had to admit that Katherine seemed lighter with him around, less burdened. Katherine found herself looking forward to the evenings when Isaac would appear at her door. They would eat together and talk about everything and nothing her work, his time in the mountains, books they had read, memories from before their lives took unexpected turns. Isaac was surprisingly well-read for a mountain man, and Katherine learned he had grown up in an educated household back east before the war changed everything. My father was a professor, Isaac told her one evening, his long legs stretched out toward her fireplace. Wanted me to follow in his footsteps. Then the war came and I enlisted. When I came back, I could not stand being inside anymore, could not stand the noise and the crowds and everyone wanting to talk about things that did not matter. So you went to the mountains. So I went to the mountains. He looked at her with those dark, serious eyes. Been there mostly alone ever since, until now. What's different about now? You. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. Isaac Kane, are you courting me? Been trying to for a week. He tilted his head. Has it been working? She laughed, the sound surprising her. When had she last laughed like that, free and genuine? Yes, I suppose it has. Good. He reached across the small space and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Because I am not planning to stop. The next day, Katherine was called to attend Mary Sullivan, a first-time mother who had just gone into labor. Isaac walked her to the Sullivan house on the other side of town, carrying her medical bag despite her protests that she could manage it herself. I know you can manage, he said, but why should you have to when I am here? It was afternoon when Katherine finally emerged from the Sullivan home, tired but smiling. A healthy baby boy, an easy delivery, mother and child both doing well, the kind of birth that reminded her why she did this work. Isaac was waiting where he said he would be, under the cottonwood tree across the street, and the sight of him made her heart lift. Good outcome? He asked, reading her expression. The best. A beautiful boy. And Mary did wonderfully. Katherine let him take her bag, and they started walking. These are the births that make the hard ones bearable. They were passing the general store when Mrs. Henderson, the postmaster's wife, stopped them. Miss Palmer, could I have a word? Katherine caught the worried look on the older woman's face and nodded. Of course. Mrs. Henderson glanced at Isaac, then back at Katherine. In private, Isaac squeezed Katherine's hand and stepped away, giving them space. Mrs. Henderson leaned in close, her voice low. I wanted to warn you, dear. There has been talk about you and that mountain man. What kind of talk? People are concerned. He is not one of us, and you... Well, you are important to this community. We cannot afford to lose you if he takes you away to the mountains. Katherine felt a flash of irritation. I appreciate the concern, Mrs. Henderson, but my personal life is my own business. Of course, dear. I just thought you should know. The older woman patted her arm. Be careful with your heart. Men like that, they are not made for staying. The words followed Katherine as she rejoined Isaac, and they continued toward her cabin. He must have sensed her troubled mood because he did not press her to talk, just walked beside her with his steady, solid presence. It was not until they were inside, the door closed against the world, that Katherine spoke. Mrs. Henderson thinks you are going to break my heart. Isaac went very still. What do you think? I think... Katherine turned to face him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a question she had not known to ask. I think I am afraid she might be right. You belong in the mountains, Isaac, and I belong here. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his large hands coming up to frame her face with surprising gentleness. "I have belonged nowhere for 8 years," he said, his voice rough. "Not since the war. I have been drifting, just surviving. But standing here with you, Katherine, in this little cabin in this desert town, I feel like I finally found solid ground. You can't just give up your whole life." "What life? Spending months alone setting traps? Talking to no one but myself? That is not living, Katherine. That is hiding." His thumb brushed her cheek. "You make me want to stop hiding." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to stay, not just for a week or a month. I want to stay here with you and build a real life." His dark eyes searched hers. "If you want that too." Katherine's breath caught. "I do. God help me, I do. But Isaac, we barely know each other. Then we will take time to know each other better. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow." He smiled, and it transformed his rough features into something almost boyish. "Maybe next week." She laughed despite herself, swatting his chest. "You are impossible." "I am serious about you, Katherine Palmer." He pulled her closer, his arms coming around her, and Katherine let herself lean into his strength. "I have never been more serious about anything." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the golden afternoon light. Katherine felt something shift inside her, a wall she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. She had been alone for so long, carrying her burdens by herself, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to lean on. "Stay for dinner," she said against his chest. "I will actually cook this time instead of you bringing me food." "Can you cook?" She pulled back to glare at him, but his eyes were twinkling. "I am an excellent cook when I'm not exhausted from deliveries." "Then I will stay, but I am chopping the vegetables. Your knives are too dull." "My knives are fine. They are terrible. I will sharpen them tomorrow." Katherine shook her head, but she was smiling. This was what it would be like with Isaac, she realized, constant small caretaking, his protective instincts showing up in practical ways. She found she did not mind at all. Over the next month, Isaac made good on his promise to stay. He took odd jobs around town, helping with construction, working at the livery, hauling supplies. The work was beneath his capabilities, but he did it without complaint, slowly winning over the skeptical townspeople with his quiet competence and obvious devotion to Katherine. He also kept his trap lines, heading into the mountains for a few days every couple of weeks to check them. Katherine hated those days, worried about him alone in the wilderness, but she understood he needed it, the solitude, the wild places. He always came back looking more settled, ready to rejoin the civilized world. Their courtship deepened into something real and solid. Katherine learned that Isaac had nightmares sometimes, waking, gasping from dreams he would not talk about. She learned that he could not stand loud, sudden noises, that crowds made him tense and watchful. She learned that his hands, so large and rough, could be infinitely gentle when they touched her, and that his rare smiles were worth waiting for. Isaac learned that Katherine pushed herself too hard, that she carried guilt like a stone in her chest, that she had never learned to accept help gracefully. He learned that she was brilliant with herbs and remedies, that she read medical journals obsessively trying to improve her skills, that she cried after difficult births when she thought no one could hear. He learned that she fit perfectly against his chest, and that making her laugh became his favorite accomplishment. 3 months after they met, Isaac asked Katherine to marry him. He did it without flourish or grand gestures, just took her hand one evening and said, "Marry me, Katherine. Let me take care of you for the rest of our lives." "Yes," she said, no hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the meeting house. Katherine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and Isaac wore new clothes purchased specially for the occasion, though he drew the line at cutting his hair. The whole town turned out, curiosity and goodwill mixed together, to see the midwife marry the mountain man. Isaac spoke his vows in his rough, honest voice, promising to love and protect Katherine until his last breath. Katherine promised to stand beside him through whatever came, to build a life together that honored them both. When he kissed her, his lips gentle against hers, Katherine felt like she was finally, truly home. They spent their wedding night in Katherine's cabin, now their cabin. Isaac was patient and tender, taking his time, making sure Katherine felt safe and cherished. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his broad chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I never thought I would have this," she said quietly. "A husband, a partner. I thought it would just be me and my work forever." "Is this better?" His deep voice rumbled in his chest. "So much better." She tilted her head to look at him. "I love you, Isaac Kane." "I love you too, Katherine Kane." He tightened his arms around her. "My wife." The word sent a thrill through her. Wife. She was someone's wife, and he was her husband, and they had their whole lives ahead of them. The next few months passed in a haze of happiness. They settled into married life with surprising ease, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Isaac built an addition onto the cabin, giving them more space and a proper room for Katherine's medical supplies. He was gone less frequently now, having sold most of his trap lines to another mountain man, keeping just a few to maintain some connection to that life. Katherine continued her work as a midwife, but with Isaac's support it felt less overwhelming. He often accompanied her to births, staying outside but nearby, a solid presence she could count on. The women of St. George grew used to seeing the mountain man waiting patiently through long labors, always ready to walk his wife home. It was 6 months into their marriage when Katherine started feeling unwell. At first, she dismissed it as exhaustion. She had attended 3 difficult births in 1 week. But when the nausea persisted and her monthly courses failed to arrive, a different possibility occurred to her. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had attended hundreds of births, had seen all the things that could go wrong. She knew the dangers too well, but she also knew the incredible gift of new life, the miracle of holding your own child. Katherine wanted to be sure before she told Isaac, so she waited another 2 weeks, watching for signs. Her breasts grew tender, her fatigue deepened, and the nausea hit every morning like clockwork. There was no doubt. She told him over dinner, the words spilling out in a nervous rush. "Isaac, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." His fork clattered to his plate. "You are sure?" "I'm sure." For a moment he just stared at her, his face unreadable. Then he was around the table, pulling her up into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Katherine," he said against her hair, his voice thick. "A baby. Our baby. Are you happy?" He pulled back to look at her, and she saw his eyes were wet. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. You have given me everything, Katherine. Everything I never thought I would have." They held each other, swaying slightly in the lamplight, the future suddenly bright with possibility. A baby. Their family, growing. The pregnancy progressed normally at first. Katherine cut back on her midwife duties, knowing she needed to conserve her energy. Isaac became even more protective, constantly checking on her, making sure she ate properly and rested enough. It would have been suffocating if it did not come from such obvious love. But at 4 months, Katherine woke in the night with sharp, cramping pains. She knew immediately something was wrong. Blood soaked through her nightgown, too much blood, and panic clawed at her throat. "Isaac," she gasped, clutching her belly. "Something is wrong." He was up instantly, lighting lamps, his face going pale when he saw the blood. "What do I do? Tell me what to do." "Get Mrs. Morrison." Agnes Morrison was the closest thing Katherine had to a colleague, an older woman who had worked as a midwife before Katherine's mother. "Hurry!" Isaac ran into the night, and Katherine was left alone with her fear and the terrible cramping pain. She knew what was happening. She had seen it before in other women. Her body was rejecting the pregnancy, forcing it out. There was nothing to be done but let it happen and pray the bleeding stopped before she bled out. Mrs. Morrison arrived with Isaac close behind, took one look at the situation, and sent Isaac out of the room despite his protests. For the next hour, Katherine endured the loss of the baby she had barely started to know. The pain was physical, yes, but worse was the grief that threatened to drown her. When it was over, Mrs. Morrison cleaned her up with gentle efficiency. "I am so sorry, dear," the older woman said. "These things happen sometimes, especially with first pregnancies. It does not mean you cannot have others." But Katherine was not listening. She was staring at the ceiling, feeling hollow and broken. Isaac came back in when Mrs. Morrison left, his face haggard. He sat on the edge of the bed and carefully gathered Katherine into his arms. She could feel him shaking. I lost the baby, she said, the words tasting like ash. I know. His voice was raw. I know, love. I'm so sorry. They held each other while Katherine cried, great wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. Isaac did not try to tell her it would be all right or that they could try again. He just held her and let her grieve. The next few weeks were dark ones. Katherine went through the motions of living, but the light had gone out of her. She could not bear to attend births, could not stand seeing other women with babies when hers was gone. Isaac watched her with worried eyes, but gave her space to grieve in her own way. Slowly, painfully, Katherine began to heal. The physical recovery was faster than the emotional one, but she was young and healthy. After 6 weeks, Mrs. Morrison examined her and declared her fully recovered. You can try again whenever you are ready, the older woman said kindly. Katherine and Isaac did try again, once she felt ready. For several months, nothing happened. Then, finally, blessedly, Katherine's courses stopped and the familiar symptoms returned. She was pregnant again. This time, Katherine did not let herself get excited. She could not bear another loss. But Isaac's joy was impossible to suppress, and gradually his hope began to infect her. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time they would get their baby. The pregnancy progressed week by week. Katherine passed the 4-month mark where she lost the first baby, and some of her fear eased. She felt the quickening, those first tiny flutters of movement, and tears of relief ran down her face. The baby was alive and moving and growing. At 6 months, Katherine finally let herself believe it might actually happen. Her belly was round and prominent now, the baby active especially at night. Isaac would put his large hand on her stomach and feel the kicks, his face transforming with wonder. Strong baby, he would say. Takes after you. I think those kicks have your strength, Katherine would reply, rubbing the sore spot where tiny feet pummeled her ribs. But at 7 months, disaster struck again. Katherine woke with that familiar, terrible cramping pain. No, she thought desperately, not again. Please, not again. This time the labor came fast and hard. Isaac sent for Mrs. Morrison and stayed with Katherine, holding her hand through the contractions. It was too early, much too early. Babies born this premature rarely survived. The baby boy was born in the pre-dawn darkness, tiny and blue and silent. Mrs. Morrison tried to stimulate him to breathe, rubbing his chest, clearing his airways, but nothing worked. He was too small, his lungs too undeveloped. After several minutes, she wrapped him in a cloth and handed him to Katherine. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Morrison said, tears on her own weathered face. He is gone. Katherine stared down at the impossibly small baby in her arms. He looked perfect, tiny fingers and toes, a little nose, dark hair like Isaac's. But he was not breathing, not moving, not alive. She had carried him for 7 months, felt him kick and hiccup, imagined his future. And now he was gone. Isaac's face was gray as he looked at his son. Can I hold him? Katherine passed the small bundle to her husband and watched as this strong, solid man cradled their dead child with infinite tenderness. A sob tore from his throat, harsh and broken, and Katherine realized she had never seen Isaac cry before. They sat together on the bed, holding their baby and each other, while the sun rose outside. Mrs. Morrison stayed nearby, giving them privacy but ready to help if needed. Eventually, gently, she took the baby to prepare him for burial. The loss of their son broke something fundamental in both of them. Katherine sank into a grief so deep she could barely function. Isaac held himself together enough to make arrangements, to bury their baby boy in a small grave under a cottonwood tree, to keep Katherine fed and clean. But inside, he was shattered too. Weeks passed. Katherine healed physically again, but this time the emotional recovery seemed impossible. She had lost 2 babies now, had held her dead son in her arms. The pain was unbearable. One night, about a month after the loss, Isaac found Katherine in their bedroom staring at nothing. Katherine, he said gently, talk to me. I cannot do this again, she said, her voice flat. I cannot lose another baby. I cannot go through this again. Then we will not. I want children, Isaac. I want to be a mother. But my body. Her voice broke. My body keeps betraying me. Isaac sat beside her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. Then we will find another way. What other way is there? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. There are children who need homes, orphans we could adopt. Katherine turned to look at him, something flickering in her dead eyes. Adopt? Why not? A child who needs parents, we want a child. It makes sense. But it would not be ours, not really. It would be ours in every way that matters. Isaac squeezed her hands. Katherine, I want children. I want to be a father. But more than that, I want you whole and healthy and not breaking yourself trying to carry a pregnancy your body cannot sustain. If adoption is the way we build our family, then that is what we will do. The idea took root in Katherine's mind, a tiny seed of hope in the barren landscape of her grief. Do you really mean it? I've never been more serious. He pulled her close. We will adopt a child, or two, or a dozen if that's what you want. A dozen? Despite everything, Katherine felt a smile tugging at her lips. However many need us, however many we can love. Katherine buried her face in his chest, breathing in his familiar scent. I love you, Isaac Kane. I love you too. And we are going to be parents, Katherine. One way or another, we are going to have our family. The next day, Katherine asked Mrs. Morrison to examine her one more time. She wanted to know if carrying another pregnancy was even possible, or if her body simply could not do it. Mrs. Morrison's examination was thorough and gentle. When it was done, the older woman's face was grave. I need to be honest with you, dear. Your womb has significant scarring from the losses. I do not think you can carry a baby to term. The words were a knife, even though Katherine had suspected. You are saying I can never have children. I am saying carrying them yourself is unlikely to succeed and might endanger your life. Mrs. Morrison took her hand. I am so sorry, Katherine. I know this is not what you wanted to hear. Katherine walked home in a daze. When she arrived, Isaac took one look at her face and knew. What did she say? She said, I cannot have children. The words came out flat, factual. My womb is too damaged. I could get pregnant again, maybe, but I would just lose it, or it might kill me trying. Isaac pulled her into his arms. Then we adopt. Isaac. Then we adopt, he repeated firmly. This does not change anything. We already decided. But you should have a choice. You could marry someone else, someone who could give you biological children. He gripped her shoulders, his dark eyes fierce. Do not say that. You are my wife, Katherine, the only woman I want, the only family I need. If we adopt 20 children, they will be mine just as much as if I fathered them myself. Do you understand me? Katherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. Good. He gentled his grip, pulling her close again. Now stop trying to get rid of me. You are stuck with me forever. That afternoon, they went to see Pastor Williams at the church. He was a practical man who oversaw much of the community's welfare work, including the occasional placement of orphan children. We want to adopt a child, Isaac said without preamble. What do we need to do? Pastor Williams looked surprised. I did not realize you were considering adoption. We are not just considering, Katherine said, finding her voice. We want to do it. I cannot have children naturally, and there are children who need homes. It seems like something good could come from heartbreak. The pastor's expression softened. I am sorry for your losses, Mrs. Kane. The whole community has been praying for you both. He sat back in his chair, thinking. We do not have any children in immediate need here in St. George, but I know the territorial orphanage in Salt Lake City is always overcrowded. I can write to them on your behalf. How long would that take? Isaac asked. Could be weeks, could be months. These things do not move quickly. Write the letter, Isaac said, today if possible. We want to start this process. Pastor Williams nodded. I will write it this afternoon. Though I should warn you, they prefer to place children with families who have been married longer, who have more stability. We are stable, Katherine interrupted. Isaac works steadily, we own our home outright, and I am the midwife. We can provide for a child, several children if needed. I believe you, the pastor said gently. I am just preparing you for possible obstacles. They left with his promise to contact the orphanage, hope and fear tangled together in their chests. This was really happening. They were going to become parents one way or another. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from the Salt Lake City Territorial Orphanage. Catherine's hands shook as she opened it, Isaac reading over her shoulder. The orphanage had received their inquiry. They had many children in need of placement. However, the director wanted to interview the Kanes in person before approving an adoption. Could they come to Salt Lake City within the month? "We will leave tomorrow," Isaac said immediately. Katherine looked at him. "That is a 3-day journey each way, and I have patience. Mrs. Morrison can cover for you. This is more important." He was right. Katherine sent word to her patients that she would be away for a week, arranged for Mrs. Morrison to handle any emergencies, and packed their bags. The next morning, they set out in a wagon Isaac borrowed from the livery, heading north toward Salt Lake City. The journey was long but beautiful, taking them through Red Rock canyons and up into pine-covered mountains. Isaac drove the wagon while Katherine sat beside him, watching the landscape change. She tried not to let herself hope too much, but it was impossible. Somewhere in that orphanage was possibly their child waiting for them. They reached Salt Lake City on the 3rd day, dusty and tired, but determined. The orphanage was a large brick building on the east side of the city, imposing and institutional. Katherine felt her stomach tighten as they approached. Inside, they were greeted by a stern-looking woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Mrs. Blackwell, the orphanage director. She looked them up and down with sharp eyes, taking in Isaac's rough appearance and Katherine's simple dress. "Mr. and Mrs. Kane, please come to my office." They followed her down a hallway lined with closed doors. Katherine could hear children's voices somewhere deeper in the building, laughing, crying, playing. Her heart ached. Mrs. Blackwell's office was cramped and cluttered with paperwork. She gestured for them to sit and took her place behind the desk. "Tell me why you want to adopt." Katherine and Isaac exchanged glances. Then Katherine spoke, her voice steady. "I cannot have children. My body cannot carry a pregnancy to term. We lost 2 babies, and I cannot bear to try again only to fail. But we want a family. We want children to love and raise, and there are children here who need parents. It seems like we could help each other." "What do you do for work, Mr. Kane?" "I was a trapper, but I have settled in St. George now. I do construction, work at the livery, whatever needs doing. I am strong and capable, and I provide well for my wife." "And you, Mrs. Kane?" "I'm a midwife. I have my own practice in St. George. Between us, we earn enough to support a family comfortably." Mrs. Blackwell made notes, her face unreadable. "Do you have a preference? Age? Gender?" "No," Katherine said immediately. "We just want a child who needs us. Most people want babies. Infants are easier to place." "We are not most people," Isaac said, his deep voice firm. "Give us whoever needs a home the most." Something shifted in Mrs. Blackwell's expression. "Most couples say they will take anyone, but when faced with an older child, or one with difficulties, they change their minds." "We will not," Katherine said. "We mean what we say." The director studied them for a long moment. Then she stood. "Come with me." She led them deeper into the building, through a common room where a dozen children of various ages played or did chores. They all looked up as the adults passed, their faces a mixture of hope and wariness. Katherine wanted to scoop them all up and take them home. Mrs. Blackwell stopped at a doorway and knocked. A moment later, a woman appeared, younger, kinder looking. "Yes, madam?" "Is Sarah here?" "In the corner, reading." They entered what appeared to be a dormitory for older girls. Beds lined the walls, and near the back window, a girl of about 8 sat with a book, her dark hair in a braid, her face serious and focused. "Sarah," Mrs. Blackwell called, "come here, please." The girl looked up, and Katherine's breath caught. There was something in those blue eyes, intelligence and sadness, defiance. This was a child who had learned not to hope for too much. Sarah approached slowly, clutching her book. "Yes, madam?" "These are Mr. and Mrs. Kane. They are interested in adoption." Mrs. Blackwell's voice gentled. "Say hello, Sarah." "Hello," the girl said quietly, looking at the floor. Katherine crouched down to be at eye level. "Hello, Sarah. What are you reading?" Sarah held up the book, a collection of fairy tales worn from many readings. "I like stories." "Me too," Katherine said. "My favorite is the one about the princess who saves herself." For the first time, Sarah's eyes met hers. "You mean when she climbs down her own hair?" "That's the one. That's my favorite too." A tiny smile flickered across Sarah's face. Katherine felt something click into place in her chest. This child. This solemn, book-loving girl with sadness in her eyes. This was their daughter. She looked up at Isaac and saw the same realization on his face. He crouched down beside Katherine, his large frame probably intimidating, but his expression gentle. "How would you like to come home with us, Sarah? To St. George?" Sarah looked between them, confusion and hope warring on her face. "To stay?" "To stay," Katherine confirmed. "Forever, to be our daughter." "Forever?" The word came out whispered, like Sarah was afraid to believe it. "Forever," Isaac repeated. "We have a nice cabin, and there is a good school, and we would take care of you and love you as much as any parents ever loved a child. What do you think?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why me?" Katherine's heart broke at the question. "Because the moment I saw you, I knew you were supposed to be ours. Does that sound all right to you?" Sarah nodded, tears spilling over. "Yes. Yes, please." Katherine pulled the girl into her arms, this child who was now her daughter, and felt Isaac's arms come around both of them. Sarah was thin and small for 8 years old, but she was alive and here and theirs. The paperwork took 2 days to complete. Sarah had been at the orphanage for 3 years since her parents died of cholera. She had no other family and had watched other children get adopted while she was passed over again and again. Mrs. Blackwell confided that Sarah's age and her quiet, serious nature made her harder to place. Most families wanted younger, livelier children. "But she's a wonderful girl," the director said. "Smart, well-behaved, reads at a level far above her age. She just needs someone to give her a chance." "She has her chance now," Katherine said. "She has a family." When the papers were signed and everything was official, they took Sarah back to the dormitory to gather her belongings. The girl had pitifully few things, a few items of worn clothing, the fairy tale book, and a small wooden horse that she said her father had carved for her before he died. "That is all right," Katherine said. "We will get you new clothes and books and whatever else you need." They left Salt Lake City the next morning with Sarah sitting between them on the wagon seat. The girl was quiet, stealing glances at her new parents like she could not quite believe they were real. Isaac caught Katherine's eye over Sarah's head and smiled a real, full smile that transformed his entire face. They were a family now. Against all odds, despite all the heartbreak, they were a family. The journey back to St. George took 3 days, and with each passing mile, Sarah relaxed a little more. She asked questions about their home, about the town, about what her life would be like. Katherine answered patiently, painting a picture of the life they would build together. Isaac mostly listened, occasionally adding a detail or answering a direct question. But Katherine could see him watching Sarah with a fierce protectiveness already forming. This was his daughter now, and he would move mountains to keep her safe. They reached St. George in late afternoon, the red rocks glowing in the slanting sunlight. Sarah's eyes went wide. "It is so pretty here." "It is," Katherine agreed, "very different from Salt Lake City." They pulled up to the cabin, and Isaac lifted Sarah down from the wagon. "Welcome home," he said. Sarah stared at the neat adobe cabin with its new addition, the garden Katherine tended, the mountains rising in the distance. "This is ours?" "This is ours," Katherine confirmed. "Come see your room." They had decided Sarah should have the addition's main room, giving her space of her own. It was not fancy, but Katherine had made up the bed with clean quilts and put wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. Sarah walked in slowly, touching things with careful fingers like she was afraid they might disappear. "This is all mine?" she asked. "All yours," Isaac said from the doorway. "We will get more furniture as you need it. A bookshelf definitely, since you like to read." Sarah turned to look at them, her blue eyes bright with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for choosing me." Katherine crossed the room and pulled her daughter into a hug. "Thank you for choosing us too." Over the next weeks, they settled into being a family. Sarah was quiet and careful at first, clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this dream to end. But Isaac and Katherine were patient, showing her through 1,000 small actions that she was home for good. Isaac built Sarah a bookshelf and took her to the general store to pick out new books. Katherine taught her to garden and to recognize medicinal herbs. They enrolled her in the local school, and the teacher reported that Sarah was exceptionally bright, already reading at an advanced level. At night, Katherine would tuck Sarah into bed and read to her until the girl fell asleep. Isaac would stand in the doorway watching, and Katherine could see the wonder on his face. They were parents. They had a daughter. The grief of their losses would always be there, but it was softened now by the joy of this new life they were building. One evening, about a month after bringing Sarah home, Katherine found the girl crying quietly in her room. She sat on the bed and pulled Sarah close. "What is wrong, sweetheart?" "I miss my first parents," Sarah said through her tears. "Does that make you sad?" "No, honey, not at all." Katherine stroked Sarah's hair. "Your first parents loved you very much, and it is good that you remember them. We are not trying to replace them. We are just honored to be your parents now." "Can I love both?" Sarah asked. "Them and you?" "You should love both. Your heart is big enough for all of us." Katherine kissed the top of Sarah's head. "They would be happy knowing you have a family who loves you." Sarah relaxed against her, and Katherine felt a fierce surge of maternal love. This child might not have grown in her body, but she was Katherine's daughter in every way that mattered. When Sarah fell asleep, Katherine found Isaac outside, staring at the stars. She slipped her hand into his. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For loving me enough to find another way. For being willing to adopt. For making me a mother when I thought it was impossible." Isaac turned to face her, his rough hands cupping her face. "You made me want to be part of the world again, Katherine. You made me want to build a life instead of just surviving. Sarah is a gift, but you are the reason I am here at all." He kissed her, tender and deep, and Katherine felt gratitude wash over her. They had been through so much loss and grief and heartbreak, but they had come through it together, and on the other side was this beautiful, unexpected family. A year passed. Sarah bloomed in their care, growing taller and more confident. Her smiles came more easily, and her laughter rang through the cabin. She adored Isaac, following him around when he did chores, and she and Katherine grew close as they worked side by side in the garden and the kitchen. Katherine continued her work as a midwife, and Sarah sometimes came along to births, watching with intense interest. "I want to be like you when I grow up," Sarah told Katherine one day. "I want to help people." "Then we will make sure you get the education you need," Katherine promised. But as happy as they were, Katherine could not help noticing the other orphans in the territory who needed homes. She and Isaac talked about it frequently. "There are so many children without families," Katherine said one evening, "and we have room. We have love to give." "Are you saying you want to adopt again?" Isaac asked. "Would that be crazy?" He smiled. "Remember what I said? A dozen if you want." "I do not know about a dozen," Katherine laughed, "but maybe one more, or two." They talked to Sarah about it, wanting her input. Their daughter's face lit up. "I would love a brother or sister. It gets lonely sometimes being the only child." So they contacted Mrs. Blackwell again. And 6 months after adopting Sarah, they made another trip to Salt Lake City. This time, they came home with twin boys, 6-year-old brothers named Thomas and William, whose parents had died in a wagon accident. The boys were loud and energetic and constantly in motion, the complete opposite of quiet, bookish Sarah. Isaac built bunks in the addition for the boys, and Katherine sewed new clothes and linens. Their family had grown to 5, and the cabin that once seemed too big for just 2 people now rang with children's voices. Sarah took her role as big sister seriously, reading to the boys and teaching them their letters. Thomas and William Hero worshipped Isaac, following him everywhere and imitating his serious expressions and careful movements. Katherine found herself cooking for 5 instead of 2, washing mountains of laundry, and falling into bed exhausted but deeply content every night. "Still want more?" Isaac teased one evening after a particularly chaotic dinner. Katherine looked around the table at Sarah helping William with his food, at Thomas chattering excitedly about something he saw that day, at Isaac's amused expression. "Maybe 1 or 2 more," she said. Eventually came sooner than expected. A family in St. George died of influenza, leaving behind 3 orphaned children, a 10-year-old girl named Margaret, an 8-year-old boy named James, and a 4-year-old girl named Lucy. The community was scrambling to find placement for them, wanting to keep the siblings together if possible. "We will take them," Katherine said immediately when Pastor Williams mentioned the situation. "All three?" he asked, surprised. "Katherine, you already have 3 children. 6 would be wonderful," Isaac finished. "We have room, and these children need a family. We will manage." So Margaret, James, and Lucy joined their household. Margaret was serious and maternal, having taken care of her younger siblings after their parents fell ill. She and Sarah became fast friends, and Katherine was grateful for another girl in the house. James was wild and rough-edged, grieving his parents through acting out, but Isaac's patient firmness gradually brought him around. Little Lucy was shy and clingy, attaching herself to Katherine and crying if her new mother left her sight. The cabin was bursting at the seams now. Isaac started building a proper addition, multiple bedrooms, a larger kitchen, a common room where they could all gather. Men from the church came to help, and the community that once viewed Isaac with suspicion now saw him as one of them, a devoted father and husband working to provide for his ever-growing family. 6 children, Katherine said one night, watching Isaac work on the addition by lamplight. "That is more than most families." "And you want more," he said, reading her expression. "How did you know?" He set down his hammer and came to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Because I know you, Katherine Kane. You have enough love for 20 children, and every orphan you hear about breaks your heart." "We cannot save them all," she said, but her voice was wistful. "No, but we can save a few more." He kissed her temple. "Let us get this addition finished first, though." The addition took 3 months to complete. By the time it was done, they had a proper house, 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a common room with a fireplace. Isaac had built it solid and strong, meant to last generations. Katherine walked through it in amazement at how far they had come from that first small cabin. Their family continued to grow. A year later, they adopted 2 more children, 9-year-old Henry, whose parents had abandoned him, and 5-year-old Rebecca, who had been born to a woman too young and poor to care for her. Then came 10-year-old Samuel, who had been living on the streets of Salt Lake City until the orphanage took him in. 9 children now filled their home with noise and life and love. Katherine and Isaac had to be organized and efficient, dividing tasks and responsibilities. Sarah, Margaret, and Henry helped with the younger children. Isaac worked steadily to provide for their large family, and Katherine balanced her midwifery practice with motherhood, sometimes bringing the children along on calls. The community of St. George watched in amazement as the Kanes took in child after child. Some people thought they were crazy, but most saw the love in that household, saw the way broken, hurt children blossomed under Katherine and Isaac's care, and called it remarkable. "You have built something special," Mrs. Morrison told Katherine one day. "Those children are lucky to have you." "We are lucky to have them," Katherine corrected. "Every single one is a gift." On their 5th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Katherine stood on their porch watching their 9 children play in the yard. Sarah was reading to Rebecca under a tree. Margaret was braiding Lucy's hair. The boys were engaged in some elaborate game involving stick swords and loud battle cries. "A dozen," Isaac said quietly. "You remember? I said we would adopt a dozen if you wanted." "We are almost there," Katherine replied. "Just 3 more. He looked at her, eyebrows raised. "You're serious? If the right children come along?" "Yes." She leaned against him. "I know it is a lot. I know we have our hands full. But Isaac, when I think about those 2 babies we lost, my heart does not hurt as much anymore. Because we took that grief and turned it into all this." She gestured at the children. 9 lives changed. 9 children who have a home and a family and a future. That is not nothing. "That is everything," Isaac agreed. He pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "Every single one of them calls me Papa. Every single one of them is mine." His voice was rough with emotion, not because I fathered them, but because I love them, because I would do anything for them. That is what makes a father, Katherine. And you made me one. Katherine turned in his arms to look up at him. "You made me a mother. Even though my body could not do it, you found a way. You gave me everything I wanted." They kissed, unhurried and sweet, the sound of their children's laughter a perfect soundtrack. Over the next 2 years, 3 more children joined the Kane family. 11-year-old Daniel, whose father died in a mining accident. 7-year-old Anna, who had been found wandering alone after Native American raids killed her family. And lastly, 6-month-old baby Peter, whose young mother died in childbirth and who had no one else. 12 children. A dozen, just as Isaac had promised all those years ago. The Kane household was organized chaos. Katherine and Isaac had refined their routines to near military precision. The older children helped with the younger ones. Everyone had chores. Meals were massive communal affairs with 3 tables pushed together. The house rang with noise from dawn to well past dusk, but it also rang with laughter, with love, with the sound of children who had once been alone and scared and unwanted, now part of something bigger than themselves. A family. Katherine was 40 now, and Isaac was 45. They had been married for 17 years, though it felt simultaneously like forever and no time at all. Isaac's hair was more gray than brown now, though he was still strong and muscular from constant physical work. Katherine had lines around her eyes from smiling and worrying in equal measure. They sat on their porch one summer evening, after all the children were finally in bed, exhausted but content. "Do you think we are done?" Katherine asked. 12 seems like a good number." "It does," Isaac agreed. "Though knowing you, if another child showed up needing a home tomorrow, you would find room." "You are not wrong," Katherine laughed, "but I think we are at capacity. Anything more and I might actually lose my mind." "You are the least crazy person I know," Isaac said. "You took a broken mountain man and a bunch of orphaned children and made a family. That is not crazy. That is miraculous." Katherine reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Remember that first day we met, when you found me exhausted on my front step? You told me you were fine when you could barely stand. And you brought me food and would not take no for an answer." Isaac smiled. "I think I loved you from that first moment. I just did not have the words for it yet." "I was terrified of you," Katherine admitted. "This intense stranger who looked at me like he could see right through my walls. And now? Now I cannot imagine life without you. You and our dozen children." She squeezed his hand. "We did it, Isaac. We took heartbreak and loss and turned it into this beautiful, messy, perfect life. We did." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "And I would not change a single thing." As the years continued to pass, the Kane children grew. Sarah became a teacher, staying in St. George, and eventually becoming a midwife like Katherine. Margaret married a local rancher and had children of her own, making Katherine and Isaac grandparents. The boys learned trades: carpentry, blacksmithing, animal husbandry. Anna became a skilled seamstress. The younger children were still finding their paths, but all of them were loved, educated, and prepared for whatever futures they chose. Katherine and Isaac aged together, their love deepening with every passing year. They watched their children grow and thrive, watched their family tree branch out as some married and had children of their own. The house that Isaac built remained full of life and laughter, even as the children gradually left to build their own lives. But they always came home. For Sunday dinners, for holidays, for the times when they needed their parents' advice or support. The Kane house became a gathering place for the whole extended family, proof that love was not limited by blood. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their 12 children, their growing number of grandchildren, and half the town of St. George, Katherine stood and raised her glass. 30 years ago, I met a mountain man who changed my life," she said, looking at Isaac with eyes that still held all the love of that first year. "I was broken, convinced I would never have the family I dreamed of. And he looked at me and said we would find a way. He promised me we would adopt a dozen children if that is what it took. And he kept that promise." She turned to look at their children, all grown now, all successful and happy and whole. "You 12 are the greatest gifts of my life. You came to us from heartbreak and loss, but you brought us nothing but joy. You took our grief and transformed it into purpose. You made us parents when we thought it was impossible. And we love each one of you more than words can say." Isaac stood, his strong frame still solid despite his 63 years. "What your mother said," he rumbled, his eyes suspiciously bright. "All of it. You are mine, every single one of you, and I am the luckiest man who ever lived." The room erupted in cheers and tears and hugs. The party went late into the night, full of stories and laughter and the warmth of family. And when everyone finally left and Katherine and Isaac climbed into bed, exhausted but happy, they held each other close. "Do you have any regrets?" Katherine asked quietly. "Not a single one. You?" "Just that I wasted so much time thinking I was broken when really I was just meant for a different path." Katherine lifted her head to look at him. "I cannot have children, Isaac, but I'm a mother to 12. How is that not a miracle?" "It is the greatest miracle I know." He kissed her forehead. "You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into the best thing. That is who you are, Katherine Kane. That is why I love you." They fell asleep as they had for 30 years, wrapped in each other's arms, content in the life they had built, grateful for every unexpected blessing that came from choosing love over bitterness, hope over despair. Years later, when Katherine was 70 and Isaac 75, they sat on their porch in the red rock desert of southern Utah and watched the sun set. Their children were all grown with families of their own. Their grandchildren numbered in the dozens. Their great-grandchildren were starting to arrive. "She can't have children," Katherine said suddenly, repeating the words that Midwife had spoken so long ago, the words that had broken her heart. "Then we will adopt a dozen," Isaac replied, exactly as he had all those years before. Katherine laughed, the sound rich and full. "We did we not? We adopted 12 children and built a legacy bigger than we ever imagined." "We built a family," Isaac corrected. "Everything else just followed from that." They held hands as the sky turned crimson and gold, the desert evening cooling around them. Two people who had found each other in the hardest season of their lives and chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of their grief. A mountain man and a midwife who took 12 children nobody else wanted and loved them into becoming the people they were meant to be. "I would do it all again," Katherine said. "Every loss, every heartbreak, if it meant ending up here with you and our family." "So would I," Isaac said, 1,000 times over. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the red rocks in shades of fire. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear the voices of the grandchildren who were visiting. The next generation, growing up knowing they were wanted and loved, carrying forward the legacy of family that Katherine and Isaac had built. It was not the story Katherine had imagined when she was a young midwife, certain she would never be a mother. It was not the life Isaac had pictured when he was alone in the mountains, convinced he would never belong anywhere. But it was their story, and it was more than either of them had ever dared to dream possible. They sat together as darkness fell, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had taken tragedy and transformed it into triumph. The midwife, who could not have children, the mountain man who promised they would adopt a dozen. Together, they had created not just a family, but a testament to the power of choosing love, always love, no matter how impossible the circumstances seemed. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. Not the heartbreak that brought them to their knees, but the choice to stand back up together and build something lasting from the rubble. A house full of children, a life full of purpose, a love that endured through everything and came out stronger on the other side. As the stars emerged overhead, Katherine and Isaac Kane sat in peaceful silence, their hands still clasped after half a century together. Behind them, the house they built echoed with the sounds of family. Before them stretched the desert that had witnessed their whole journey, beautiful and eternal. They had survived the heartbreak. They had built the family. They had lived the love story. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.